Hi, this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of the Contrarian. We are thrilled to have back another friend from Peril, Marylin Rodriguez. Marylin, welcome.
Welcome, and thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. You are heavily involved in a program called BRIC. What is BRIC?
So, BRIC stands for Building Resilient and Inclusive Communities of Knowledge. And it's a resource that the Peril, our research lab, has put together after doing listening sessions with all four different constituencies. We heard administrators, faculty, staff, and students who told us what were the best ways to really build resilience against hate, mis and disinformation, conspiracy theories, and polarization on campuses. And as you know, this is just really a really big problem, a really complex problem too. And unfortunately, what we've learned is that a lot of universities have a very reactive way of dealing with these issues. And so this is a resource that really helps them think of these problems from a preventative lens.
There has been a whole lot of politicization and argument about definitions. How do you come at the problem from a public health and a sociological perspective, as opposed to taking a position on this or that political issue?
I think one of the ways that we do this is that what we have seen is that first and foremost, a lot of people tend to take a security-based approach when they have these issues. So they'll say there's a hate incident on campus. The first thing that they think of is like, okay, we got to call the police. What are our policies for getting this student out of the campus? And so, and we see this not just on a university campus. This is just the way that we deal with this as a society. But from our perspective, there's a lot more that we could do to try to educate. Let's talk about faculty and staff, for example, or even students on how they could recognize the warning signs that could tell you that maybe somebody is spending a little too much time on the worst parts of the internet. And now if they're repeating those things in a classroom environment, instead of going ahead and just thinking about how do we kick that student out of the classroom, what can we do to surround them with the correct supports and try to address the root issues of their radicalization, if that's the place where they're at? And so I think that's really what we try to focus on.
And draw the line between people who may have views that you or I might disagree with, think are inappropriate, and actual radicalization, extremism that manifests itself in behavior? How do you differentiate those two things?
That's a really good question. I think that that's almost what we would hope that faculty and staff and administrators have that conversation. Because one of the biggest challenges is that when people think that we need to, be aware of these warning signs, that all of a sudden that's going to stifle free speech or, my ability to say what I think. I think, but what you do see in a lot of scenarios is that if someone, let's say, is sharing maybe something that is more on the fringes of, right-wing conspiracy theories, they immediately get shut down, alienated, and ostracized. That is the immediate reaction. And where we need intervention and training is in helping faculty understand that they have a role to play in opening up and approaching it more from a lens of curiosity and like, tell me more. Where are you reading this, right? Where are your sources, rather than immediately attacking the idea. And this is part of what we would do in a half-day workshop if we were with faculty and staff. So it's quite a complex process. It's not an easy thing that you can say like, oh, there's a formula. No, actually, it requires a more intensive dialogue that really invites multiple people to weigh in are there concerns that this is something that we should be looking more into? And there are plenty of examples, honestly, that have taught us already of the need for this kind of resource and guidance.
Tell us about some of those, because I think what's unique about your approach is you don't come at it from the perspective of someone acting in bad faith or acting to hurt others. You're coming at it from a perspective that this person has been exposed to certain information and is still open to discussion and open to further dialogue. Tell us about some of the examples that you've run across.
Yeah, so I mean, and sadly, I will tell you there's many. But one of the most recent ones, there was the tragic shooting in Florida State University, where there were 2 people who died and 6 people who were injured. In that example, we see repeatedly students and faculty naming that this student would often use white supremacist rhetoric in class that made them very uncomfortable, to the point where the student, it's reported, that was excluded from the club that he was participating in. And so that in itself is a crucial moment, right? What do we do in that moment that we can tell there's a dynamic that is off, that obviously there are students who are noticing that there's someone who is just expressing points of view that are not just different, but maybe also a little problematic. And this is where I think that that's the moment that we need to learn from. At that point, that's where a university needs to ask itself, what supports does the faculty have to be able to report, to potentially support this young person? Because if we go even further to try to, and when we get deeper into trying to understand the connections between why someone would then go and commit mass violence, because lots of people might believe these things, but it doesn't mean that they're going to go and hurt someone. I think you start to see that there are certain patterns that emerge, especially if someone has, had a problematic upbringing, and then you start pairing that up to easy access to guns like you do have in certain states of the country, then you're actually have the perfect storm for these situations. And so I think that that's part of what we want to do. And I would say that that's even already at the stage in which we're having to recognize very clear warning signs and figure out how do we intervene. There's a lot more that we can do, Jen, even before that. That it's more about, think about just like, how do we set up the right norms for being able to talk to one another and express differences without having to send people to go online to find more problematic and more further out ideas.
What do you tell students as they, or what would you like faculty to tell students as they are entering? What should they be alerted to? In other words, what are the signs that something is really off, as opposed to someone just has views that may be extreme or contrary to your belief system?
I think the first thing that we would say is, as best as you can, never to shame. Avoid shaming. And that is very difficult for young people, because that is a natural reaction. But I think one of the main things that we try to encourage people to do is just start with some open-ended questions. And it is a lot to say to a young person, you take the ownership and do that. And so I think the first thing is they need to assess, am I okay in this situation? Or do I need to ask someone for help? And so, and this is where, again, and this is another space where universities really need to think about, where can students go if they have these kinds of concerns? Who can they talk to? And I think that even that we have a lot of work to do. In particular, we do trainings and we spend a lot of time listening to presidents and chancellors, and they're telling us that they're really struggling because a lot of young people are really having a hard time socializing. So just the basic norms of socialization are making it really hard. And so imagine if all of a sudden you get into a deep conversation of somehow about politics, then if you don't have the right relationship, that's just not going to hold the conversation. And so that's why it's important for us to strengthen our bonds even more if we want to go into those spaces.
Got it. Now, sometimes there are very healthy debates on college campuses. That's what they're for, on any number of issues that could be kind of hot button issues. Do you talk to students about how to have those conversations in ways that don't immediately attack, antagonize? Because it seems like at the base of a lot of these issues is we've lost the ability for civil conversation in both senses of the word.
Absolutely. Yes. So I think that, and there are a lot of universities that are putting a lot of emphasis on this. One of the things that we do, we spend a lot of time talking to students first about where we're each coming from and understanding that whatever social media feed I might be spending most time, whatever news source I might be using, are going to skew my perspective, right? Because I get a lot of ideas reinforced based on what I'm constantly clicking on. And so then part of what we talk about from the beginning is you really have to talk about the bubble that everybody's living in. And so you have to address your individual bubble, then the bubble in the room, right? Are we who are part of this certain university only expressing this and allowing for certain ideas to be there because we belong to certain groups? And so I think naming that is an important first step. And that's why it's even more important for universities to be thinking about how they are adjusting their courses, their curriculums, to really help students navigate the proliferation of information that is out there that is going to make them think that, yeah, this is the perspective. This is why everybody thinks that this is the right way to think about this, when actually that might not be the case. You might be in an urban setting and not in a rural setting, right? And so like there are many reasons, many ways in which we need to enhance those critical thinking skills. And I'm telling you, I spent most of my time in the K-12 space in my previous professional life. And unfortunately, universities have a lot to catch up with.
Absolutely. I'm curious what the biggest challenges have been. Has it been simply universities saying, we don't need your help, we've got this? Has it been on free speech grounds? What are the kinds of barriers you've come across?
Oh, I mean, you know how Ed right now is in the middle of a complete crisis. So I think the biggest challenge is that honestly, the problems are just coming from so many different places, right? Just as they're trying to do their jobs, they're also being targeted by, other groups, and I think it's making it very difficult, particularly right now, around questions about free speech. As you know, student activism has challenged university leaders for the last 2 years. And it is creating an environment on campuses that just makes it hard to talk about certain issues. There are some issues that some universities refuse to go to because they know that they're going to end up on the media, or they're going to end up getting sued. And so I think that one of the biggest challenges is that, honestly, is just the constant concern for legal ramifications.
Sure.
And I think that now even more so, students are, now that there's this additional element of policing students' voices, that I think we're about to see an interesting year, I would say. And I think a lot of from the faculty that I've been talking to, they're just bracing themselves because they just don't know in which way things are going to get more and more difficult.
Right. When you meet with people, do you meet with a mix of people, or do you talk to professors separately, administrators separately, students, or do you put them all in the room together and work through these issues?
Oh my goodness, what a great question. So I think you're going to find that most often they tend to be in subgroups, right? The department chairs, the deans meet, the provosts meet, the presidents meet. Sometimes we have convenings and opportunities where people bring their entire teams together, but that is rare, very, 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 very rare. And what we have seen is that it's only until a university is under crisis that that's when they're willing to pull all the resources together to then bring these groups together. But it's not everybody. There are certain universities that again are using these preventative measures and really thinking about how do we talk with all of these different groups. And one of the things that I always encourage leaders to think about is, how many students do you have on the table? Because you cannot imagine how many times you do not bring along student voice. And I think that it's a missed opportunity for really being able to build their leadership, gain their perspective. And they are the ones who are really having to live these policies, and they can really speak to the reality. And so I think that it would be best if we could get multiple groups at once, but I think it's very, very, very difficult.
I understand. So not only are we at the beginning of the school year, but we're also at the time when parents and prospective students are going on campus and assessing where they should go. What are the kinds of things those people should be looking for if they want an environment that is going to be safer, more respectful, have more resilience built into the system? What are the kinds of things they should look for?
Wow. So, and particularly, I love that you brought up actually the parents as
Yeah,
a group, because I think a lot of parents are now have that concern. I'm dropping off my young person, and they're going into this residential hall. Like, are they going to be okay? Um,
right.
and I think that ultimately, we first have to start with questions around how does the university build community? Honestly, one of the things that we have seen is the universities that can stand and be more resilient to these incidents are the ones that have built stronger bonds amongst their student population. And so I think that that's one of the first things is what opportunities has the university and how creative have they been at creating different types of communities too, where someone can find belonging, right? So it's the bigger university community, but then it's the smaller versions, right? Like where do the athletes go? Where do the artists go? And I think that that's in itself one of the first places where parents can find a lot of comfort, because then they can say, okay, you know what? If my student is going through if my kid is going through something, I know that at least he's going to be surrounded by people who will be able to support him, right? But if my kid within the first few weeks or months is expressing signs of isolation for whatever reason, that would be a red flag. And if the university is not providing the right kind of services and support, then again, that would be a red flag.
Interesting. So what does a university do if they want to get involved? Or what if a student group says, we have a really bad problem on campus, but I don't want to go to the administration alone and talk to us. How would those sorts of people reach out and find you and begin the process of trying to build resilience?
So this resource is free and open to everyone. It is an interactive site, and I'm hoping that we will be able to link it through this conversation. But you can find this and other resources on our website at perilresearch.com. And they can also follow up with us on Peril trainings. That's our email address is available on our website. So if anybody, leaders, they often reach out to us and say, hey, could we set up some trainings for our faculty, for our staff? We are always available to do that. But more, I think, for the question of this is a resource that is available as a framework for students, for faculty, for staff to think about and assess is this something that we're doing in our university? Or should we be being more proactive? Should we be doing more? I remember we had a faculty last year who had an incident in their class, and they were like, if I had seen this resource would have been so helpful for me, right?
Right.
And so I think that that's one of the main things that we ask people to do is just share it broadly and widely. And that's what a lot of presidents have done as well. They have used it and embedded it in their, wider communication. And immediately we see responses from people saying, oh my goodness, this is so great. And so I think it really speaks to people's needs, because I think it is actually, we captured what these different constituencies said were the best practices, right? It is
Right.
actually a tool designed by the people who know what's best.
I would imagine also that academics who are experts in research look to a group that researches and then is testing and getting feedback and giving some quantitative data. What has been your experience? What can you tell them about the success of these types of programs?
Well, I think what we can say, even just from reading, we have the PDF is what we tested, and we can see an increase in awareness and knowledge that is significant, right? A lot of times people just don't think about these issues necessarily, and so just reading this guide can kind of make them ask themselves, okay, I am a faculty member. What would I do if I had a student who was expressing, supremacist ideologies and was all of a sudden making things uncomfortable? And then or that person might all of a sudden be a department chair who then is in a position where they can now have the power to say, oh, okay, let me bring in some programming to allow us to engage in this conversation. So I think that is one of the biggest values that we have seen. I think, and we test all of our resources and all of our other different interventions. Another thing that we do when we actually go and do trainings that come from the BRIC toolkit, we do pre-tests and post-tests. And what we see is that people, by the time that we finish the training, they feel better equipped to actually intervene, to be able to feel like I know what I can say now if this actually happens to me in my classroom. And I think that in itself is a huge, huge part of our success.
Well, this is a very timely discussion because kids are beginning school and they're looking at schools. And as we know, it's an extremely stressful time for universities that are really under siege in many respects. So thank you. And remember, folks, you can go to the PERIL website and you can get all this information, not only on BRIC, but on their other programs that they have. And we look forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks so much, Marylin.
Oh, thank you for having me, John.